Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So with those two last videos kind of out of the way, my design process and the milling process, it's time to get after these nightstands. I want to keep this, this intro here as short as I can. Hopefully by now you all know what we're going to build. I will put a picture here somewhere just in case, but this is what we've been talking about for the last two videos. As you'll see over here, I went ahead and picked up the maple for the drawer stock, and it's all milled to rough size exactly the same way as all of the other parts. Tonight and tomorrow morning, I'm going to take all of the nightstand stock to its final size, the legs and the rails. Because once we start, this build should really go pretty quickly. It's going to be Domino joinery. We'll have to do a little router work for the panels and things like that, but we'll get to that. And we'll bang this one out as quick as possible. So for now, I've got all my notes and my drawings, and I got a whole ton of material there just itching to go. So let me do a little final milling. I will see you guys sometime tomorrow, and we'll get after some joinery and hopefully get a dry fit in place. So now with all of the rail stock cut to final dimension, before we move on to joinery, there's still a lot of things that we can do with these rails. You'll notice the orange chalk marks on the faces of these. That's going all the way back to the lumber selection process, and these parts came out of the same board side by side. So I know that they're grain matched in this direction. So I just marked them that way and then chose which side was up. And of course the orange marking tells me this is the face. So anything I do to these boards will be referenced off of the face. So any error, for instance, if I'm off center on my groove, it will be that way all the way throughout and everything will work just fine. The other thing that I can do is go ahead and mark my curves. I'm not going to cut them yet, but I can mark my curves and then decide which side that groove goes on. So this is a side panel in here, and I know in this one the groove goes in this side, and I've marked a little line there as a reference for me and a little note that tells me, hey, this one only gets a 1/4 inch groove. The upper one, that groove goes through this 1/2 inch curve, so I've marked this one at 3/4. Now when I cut these smaller grooves, I'll cut this at that 3/4 as well, just because it hogs out some of that material before I raise the blade up to the full 3/4 and then take that material out. Once those grooves are in, it's a lot easier to identify for the dominoes, and we'll get those marked out. So let me get the rest of my material marked up. We'll move over to the table saw with the dado stack in, and we'll go ahead and start grooving all these parts. So I should make a couple additional notes here. The rear, I'm not going to do any curves in, and I'm only going to do the 1/4 inch groove. You're never going to see the backs, so I'm not going to put the curves in those panels. As well, the fronts, they get no grooves at all. They only get the curves. So I've added some blue tape to them to stick out. Don't groove these. So next up, we'll move over to the table saw. I've got all the parts marked, and we'll start getting the grooves. So next up, we're going to go ahead and get all those grooves in. I have the 1/2 inch dado stack set up in the saw, and I've run a test, both to make sure it's pretty centered on my actual stock, as well as to make sure it fits the plywood panel that I'm going to put in it. And I'm going to read my marks, and my faces will always go against the fence, and I'm going to verify to make sure that I need a groove in that curve. Okay, so now I've raised the blade up and I need to get the deeper grooves. I did not move the fence. Everything's going to get oriented the same. And we only have 4 pieces to run, and they would be the top rails on the 2 sides. Remember the back, it can just stay quarter on the top, quarter on the bottom, because it's going to get a flat panel anyway. Nobody's going to see that. And the fronts, of course, they get no grooves. So the last thing we can do to these before we do the joinery is go ahead and actually cut the curves in them. Normally I would cut the dominoes first. I'm just concerned with how fragile these edges are until we get a panel in them. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the curves and get everything all sanded up, and then we'll move on to the legs. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sand all these up, and I'm just going to use this little flexible sanding jig. I make these in the shop all the time. Just a little piece of hardboard, but they work nice for the curves. I'll probably turn the music up and probably spend the next hour or so sanding these out. Okay, and there you can kind of see the grain patterns that I picked out for the front. I know the glare is kind of hard. But the grains work really well together, and I put my ugliest pieces, if there really is any, in the back. So next up, I'm going to start laying out for the domino joinery. Okay, so here's where things can get real confusing, especially when you're doing 2 of these at the same time. So I like to stack the cards in my favor and set up squares. And I marked them all in blue tape and exactly what the measurement is, so I know where I'm pulling it from. So this is, just a mock-up of the front face of this nightstand. And I centered up a domino, and then I set a square to give me that measurement. So that'll give me that measurement and that measurement. It will also give me the same measurement on the very back panel. So this bottom one is a little bit trickier. So I went ahead and I marked where the foot is going to be. And I marked my line there. And I know that that will give me the mark on here. And moving to this one will give me the mark on here. And again, they're all written that way. And I can set the back up here and do it exactly the same on the back. I will have to reset for the sides, and I'll do that when I get there. But for now, I'm just going to do the fronts and the backs with the setups that I have. And like I said, this can get real confusing in a hurry. So I'm also going to number each joint with a different number, and I'll mark it on the end grain and, kind of where the domino is going to hit. And so that way I know how this goes back together. This is also when I turn the music off, and I really try to focus, because if you miss something, sometimes it's difficult to go back. Now once everything is marked, I will cut all the rails first, getting all of those dominoes done. And then I will reset my heights so that I have that 1/8 reveal here. And then I will cut all of the leg stock. So the legs are going to have multiple domino holes in it. So there's the front. Off camera, I'm going to do the back. and then relay out and do for the sides. And this is probably going to take me a little while to do all of this, but we'll get to the dominoes today, and we should be seeing a dry fit here hopefully by the end of the day. Okay, so now with all the dominoes laid out, I can go ahead and turn my music back on, get over to the domino. We're going to do all of the rails first, and then we will reset the depth, and I'll use my test leg to test that depth and to give me that 1/8 reveal, and then we'll do all the legs. But I'm going to move over to the other bench and swap the camera around and show you what's going on. Okay, and just like that, we have the first dry fit. Granted, this has taken me most of the day to get to this point. But we have a dry fit, and there's a lot of information that we can gather from this dry fit. One, everything fit correctly, so that's a bonus. The other thing I'm going to do is mark these legs for where the grooves are. And I'll do that on several of them, although once I set up one router setup, they should all be the same. I'm also know that I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch deep on those, so I can measure for my panels as well. Keeping in mind that this one up here is a little bit deeper, so I'll probably cut a little oversized and do a couple of test fits just to make sure. But I can certainly measure out for all of those panels. So additionally, when I take this back apart, I will verify that all of my labeling for how they go together stays the same. I'm almost wrapped up in here for today, but before I call it a day, I'm actually going to glue up the top as well as mill for those 2 panels that go in here, because they get a little piece of African mahogany in the front. So I'm going to glue those up. I'm also going to spend some time assessing exactly where that shelf lives in here, because we'll have to create a jig and route in for that jig, or for that panel. So I'm going to lay that out as well. But let me switch the camera around and we'll glue up a top. Okay, so apologies guys. I got into rough edit this afternoon and realized how long this video is going to end up being. So I've decided to chop this one off here and go ahead and do the nightstands in two. I was really hoping to do it in one, but I think I've gone into a lot more detail in this one than I have in previous videos. So I'll be back at it again in the morning. You guys will get to see it in a couple of weeks. And until next time, take care, guys.